Well, hey everybody, and welcome back. If you're coming back from my last video where I started to build the ReadyMade RC Screech multi-rotor frame. What's going on, Andre? I saw your picture just before we went on live. Was that the Screech or the Screech R? It looked maybe like the Screech R. But anyway, Andre posted a picture on one of the posts that I shared around in various places, and looks like he has the same frame. So this might be a review for him. But for the rest of you, I'm going to be building out the rest of this frame here. It's the ReadyMade RC Screech freestyle frame. If you tuned in last week, you'll remember that we hooked the motors up to the ESC. So we're going to continue from there today. Hopefully I'm going to be able to put the flight controller on there, which should be pretty straightforward. Yeah, so he has the Screech R, which is the racing style. It's got a little bit shorter body, and I believe it's a stretched X instead of a true X like the Screech. This is a little bit more of an all-around drone. It does great racing. It does great freestyling because of that center of balance. You can read more about that in my review on the Park Pilot of the Screech, and also see some flying footage from when I got this as a review product from ReadyMade RC. But we're going to continue on putting the flight controller here. This is a race flight, now defunct race flight, used to be Flight 1 Revolt that I have flashed with Betaflight, just to make it a little bit more topical and easier to follow. So we will be hopefully programming this drone in another video as we go on. But today we're just going to connect these two, and I hope to also start installing the video system, which is the ReadyMade RC Cricket Pro V2 VTX that I have here, as well as the Foxier Aero Pro, which is a really nice camera. It has that OSD since we don't have an OSD on the flight controller, and also a Hoot right-hand circular polarized antenna, also from ReadyMade RC. A lot of these, you'll notice I've got this ReadyMade RC build mat and everything. This is just the one that I personally have. A lot of ReadyMade RC products here where you're not sponsored by ReadyMade RC, but they did provide a lot of these parts for a previous review. So with that, you'll notice if you watched last time, I have made a little bit of updates here. I've put on these kind of wire guards here. It's just kind of a mesh that you put over there, and I've shrink tied it on each side to kind of protect the wires. I've completed, we left off right when I was starting to solder these up there. We ran out of time, so I've went ahead and completed installing the motor wires to the flight controller, and then, like I said, I've tied them off with this nice mesh, and then I've left a couple of zip ties hanging out here. And when we get to the receiver portion, you'll see why I've done that. But I've got zip ties on each 4 of the corners here, just to kind of make them nice and neat. And I'll zoom in here so you guys can see just how neat this build looks with those wires running underneath the ESC. I think it looks really nice that way. You'll notice a red mark. I've got a red mark here. I've also got a couple of red marks here on the flight controller here, and that corresponds to which side this little ribbon runs on. So the way the flight controller attaches to the ESC, you use this little piece of wiring harness here, and a lot of times they come wired just straight through. So the first pin on this would correspond to the first pin on this. Now that's great if you've got a stack that you've purchased that is going together, but these two have completely different wiring schemes, so you got to make sure you notice that. And you'll see I've got different wires going to different places, and I went ahead and pre-wired this just so you wouldn't have to sit here and watch me take little individual pins out. But basically how I did that was I got in here to these little grooves, and I've taken a pin and taken each of these out separately, and then moved them to the corresponding location on here. So you can see on these stacks here that there are, let me see if I can get in here real nice and close. There are different markings here that say what each of these are. So it looks like it goes telemetry, current monitoring, motors, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then I think that is battery, and then ground on the flight control on the ESC. And then on the flight controller, you can see where if I put it the same way, so we can kind of compare them, you've got a completely different wiring order. So you've got batteries all the way over here, current monitoring, ground. Then there's a 5-volt BEC on this one that is really nice to power your 5-volt electronics. And then you go, looks like in reverse or in proper order, 1, 2, 3, 4 with your motors. So if I would have connected that directly to the ESC, I would have completely toasted this flight controller. So that's something that you definitely want to double check. Always double check, especially your positive and negative leads when you get into wiring like this, because I have scrapped so many electronics just from messing that up. So we'll go ahead and get started here as I refocus my overhead. But this is going to be fairly simple. So I take my, I wanted to make sure, like I said, to have those marks there. So I do my 2 marks, and that lines up here. So I know that's the end I meant to go in the flight controller. And then I do the one with 1 mark here, because that's the one that I know was meant to go on the speed controller. That'll fit in just like so. And then you want to make sure that your board direction is facing forward. That's not a huge deal. You can fix that in software, but it's just easier if you mess that up. Another thing that you might take note of is where your USB plug-in is on your flight controller. So if you were to mount this, let's say in this fashion, for whatever reason, you'd have to come in all the way through the, if you have your top plate on here, that's going to be really hard to access. You'd have to come all the way in through here and get your fingers down in there and try to plug it in here. So it's a lot easier. I've seen some boards that actually have it set up with the USB on the back, and I always rotate those. But that goes on just nice and neatly right there. And you can see I've also put a couple of nuts right in here, some plastic nuts to kind of give a little bit of bushing from the ESC to the flight controller. So the flight controllers with these little bobbins here, these little gummies, they like to call them, those are not meant to be screwed down. They kind of float, so the flight controller dampens any vibrations that might confuse the software. And if I hadn't put this little nut, this little plastic nut in here, these wiring harness connectors would have touched, and it would have, you can kind of see there's not very much clearance. There's just enough clearance with those little nuts. So that is definitely a little tip that went into this build specifically. So get refocused here. So that is pretty much the connection of the flight controller to the ESC. Now, I did some behind the scenes work, as you saw, just to make that a little bit easier for us. But I hope I explained it clearly enough. If anyone has any questions over what I've done here, if I didn't explain something thoroughly enough, or I was a little confusing on some part, please feel free to mention it in the comments. I would love to answer your questions over why I did something a certain way, or if you guys even have maybe a better way of doing it, I could do that. But like I said in the last video, this is just kind of my way of building. This isn't meant to be a definitive expert opinion on how to build multirotors. This is just a few parts I had laying around, and we're just building a multirotor. So we'll continue on here. From my test fit of the video system, I found that I think where I want to install this is actually on the underside of this this plate here, because with these buttons you want to make sure you can get to these buttons. Since this is the Cricket Pro, you actually have to turn on the VTX before you fly. It starts up automatically in pit mode, so if you're racing, you don't blow out the entire line of people racing if you accidentally plug in or need to plug in for whatever reason while there are people racing. So I think what I'm going to do, because it doesn't exactly fit like this, and that pigtail will go out the back, because you need to have access to your connector here. And either way I do it really just kind of doesn't like to sit well in this frame. So you can see there, if I move my hands, it kind of, actually that might not be too bad. No, there's still not very much clearance for this connector back here. As you can see, if we plug in this connector, well, yeah, because then that doesn't like to fold over. Yeah, so we're definitely going to have to install it like this, which I don't really like because it has that pigtail coming off the side. Unless maybe that's how I wanted to do it. Like that. Yeah. Yeah, I think that must be how I did it. So one of the things that I like about this Screech frame, you can kind of see here, is that these mounting holes, these little slits that they've provided, they've got a lot of these for, you know, battery straps or whatever else that you want to tie onto there, and they're really good for zip tying things, especially this bottom plate here. They've got a lot of different options to zip tie, which is my preferred method of connecting a lot of components, is just get them in there, zip tie them down. But now that I'm saying that, well, that's not going to interfere too badly with the battery strap on that side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a little bit of piece of this Gorilla tape. This is Gorilla double-sided tape. Try double-sided tape after heat shrinking the VTX. Yeah, the problem with heat shrinking the VTX is you have to have access to these buttons here, for sure. And I just, if you heat shrink all of it, it is actually, there is a clear layer of heat shrink on it already. So you can see, I don't know if you can tell that, but you can kind of see it's glossy. There is heat shrink on it already. But these buttons, you definitely have to have access to these buttons, especially since I won't have smart audio with this flight controller that I'm using. So definitely use double-sided tape though, for sure. I'm really big fan of this Gorilla tape. So I'm going to get some of this Gorilla tape. I'm going to get out my hobby knife here. Couldn't find it last time. I've got it here this time. And I've got my my kit of tools here while I have this out. And it's actually, don't tell anybody else, it's a makeup bag. It's Flirt. I just had this laying around. My wife probably had it, so I've got a bunch of different stuff here. A portable soldering iron. I've got all of my different pliers and stuff. I've got a Leatherman, some extra solder, solder sucker. It's all on this side, which is my bigger stuff. And then I've got my various drivers and screwdrivers here on this side, and a pin and a Sharpie. That usually comes in handy on that side. And that's a really cool little bag that I can just stick in my flight bag, and I have my entire, I can repair an entire drone with that, especially with that battery-powered soldering iron in there. That's really nice. So what I'm going to do is take this double-sided tape. We'll go ahead and just stick some right here. I'll get about how far I need to cut into it. Cut on my nifty little mat here. So I'm not cutting up my table. Stick that right on the back. And this Gorilla Glue is amazing. You don't even need to zip tie it down, or Gorilla Tape. You don't need to zip tie it down or anything, because it actually has some pretty good staying power. So if I'm going to strap this on here is to have the pigtail in the back, or the VTX pigtail in the back, and then the connector in the front. Just kind of stick it right here in between those guys there. And I've got a little bag of zip ties off to the side here. I'm just going to zip tie that guy down. Taking care to miss those buttons so I don't have one button always pressed down. This just gives me some extra security to hold it on there. You don't need to really cinch it down or anything. And I'm going to try to miss these lights too, because this is how you know what channel you're on if you look in there. It's going to kind of stink having it upside down, but I can still see it if I look at it from behind. It's still not obstructed too badly. Cut that off and do the same up top here. That's just going to help you get a nice clean build. I want the zip ties to be going the right way, the same way, because I'm particular about that. Just like having the nicest looking builds, you know, when you get done and there's just a mess of cables everywhere and they're getting cut by your props because they're just kind of coming out the sides. That's not, I don't like that. So I like to have a nice and well kept build. Just force that down a little bit more. So that's going to be a lot more than we actually need to keep that VTX from coming off of there, but it's definitely not going to come off of there. And that won't mess with our battery too much having those zip ties there. Which this is a top mount frame. So you put the battery on the top there. Or you could do it underslung, I guess. It's just not really a good way to tie your battery down. So the nice thing about the Screech is it does come with these 3D printed parts. It actually comes with a 3D printed camera mount as well. Just in the box, it's not an option or anything like that. It just comes with it, which is really cool. It also comes with a 3D printed GoPro mount for the front. But, oh, what's up, Seth? Don't zip tie the inductor. I'm guessing that's what this is, that he's telling you not to zip tie it. That's probably a bad idea. I'm guessing it has to do with heat or something, heat dissipation. Is that what you're talking about, Seth? But anyway, it comes with these 3D printed parts just in the box. Also comes with GoPro mount, but I do not have my Hero 5 session any longer, which is unfortunate. That was the best GoPro. So I have a big honkin' GoPro that I have to put on here. But the 3D printed parts are nice, because that just goes right in here, and then it puts it nicely in between these two. What converts the power? Yeah, is that what I've got zip tied here? I'm guessing that I put over it. Which 3D printer? So I'm not sure. It actually came from ReadyMade RC that way, so I don't know which printer they use. I'm guessing they have kind of a, yeah, all right. So I'm going to cut that. Thanks, Seth, for stopping by, hanging out. Seen that guy at races quite a few times, talking shop and whatnot. So there's not really another place to put another zip tie, at least that I've given myself. But that's still not going anywhere with that Gorilla Tape. So good tip. Thanks for stopping by. That would have ruined my day. Would have crashed. I would have broke that, and I wouldn't have known what was going on. See, like I said, this isn't meant to be an expert's opinion because I am absolutely not an expert. I've just built several of these drones. I've got a fleet of, I don't know, maybe the one back by the SNA. Yep. I've got a fleet of maybe 9 or so drones. Some of them are reviews I've gotten through Model Aviation Magazine. Some of them are just my own personal fleet. But just because I have 10 of them doesn't mean I haven't built each one several times over. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just drop this in here and make sure it's going to fit. To kind of, yeah. And it's not. Yeah, that connector is actually giving me some problems. So I'm going to have to move that forward a little bit. I have a bunch of zip ties because I do this a lot. Back and forth and double check. And this is why it's a good idea to test fit before, but then you just make these little adjustments and you're good to go. So let's move that up a little bit. I hope my hands aren't getting in the way too much of this stream, guys. I apologize about that. Make sure those holes line up in the back there is what I'm looking for. Just moving it up little by little. Make sure that Gorilla Tape gets nice and worked back down. That's going to line up good. Get another zip tie out. Watch out for that inductor. We'll just zip tie this guy down. And that's really there just until the Gorilla Tape cures to kind of apply some pressure, because that stuff is good stuff. This VTX usually comes with a mic, which I am currently zip tying over the place where the mic used to be. I took it off because it was getting in the way. I don't really... Some guys like to fly with sound. I've flown with sound before, and it's nice to have your motor in your ears while you're flying, but not a necessity. All right, yeah, so that's going to work for sure. Okay, so I'm going to pop that off at the little MMCX connector on the back there, and I'm going to pop that off here at the wire harness, just so I can set that aside now that I know that that VTX is going to be nice and stay in place there. Give a little bit extra pressure. So I took this wiring harness off of another build that had an OSD. So my, like I said, this one doesn't have an OSD, so I do not need the brake in this video wire. So the yellow is usually your video wire. Don't use that Gorilla Glue. Yeah. Oh yeah, it'll pull off. Don't use the Gorilla Glue without heat shrink, or if you do, I've definitely done that before. So there is, like I was saying, a layer of heat shrink on here for sure, because the Gorilla Tape will pull off components of your circuit board. It is that strong. Not a sponsor. Okay, what was I doing? Okay, yeah. So if we pull up the pinout for the Cricut Pro, you'll notice this wire right here, this yellow wire. I usually do yellow wire as my video wire, and I feel like that's pretty standard. It's cut right here between my camera and the VTX because I was using it with a board that had an OSD, which you have to put the camera into the in on the OSD and then out. So I'm going to need to actually butt solder this, and I about did that before this stream, but I thought it might be a good opportunity to do a butt solder on stream for those of you who are not familiar with the ways of the soldering. So I'll punch in a little bit here. So I've got my little helper that I like to use. Got two little alligator clips. That is really nice for jobs like these with really small wires and parts that you need an extra helping hand. I'll go ahead and get that set up. And got a little box of heat shrink here. Get a small bit of heat shrink out. And in order to conserve some of this heat shrink, I'm actually going to cut it in half because I don't need this whole tube of heat shrink. So I'm just going to nip that right in half. I could probably do even less, actually. So I'm going to nip that right there. Get my heat shrink staged on the wire before you solder it. That's a big one. I always do that. I'll solder something together and go, okay, now time for heat shrink. Guess what? Can't put heat shrink on after you've soldered. So I've got my iron warmed up, and what I'm going to do, this is probably not how you're supposed to do this, but this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you guys can kind of see a little better. All right, I'm going to, that's where that went. I was looking for that. Get my flux out here and just dab a little bit of flux on each wire here to kind of help the solder flow into it. And then get my iron and some solder. And just like we did with the flight controller, we're going to just tin these a little bit. They might have some solder on them already, but I'm just going to make sure. So we just get a little bit of solder on there. Oops. So they're tinned, so they've got just a little bit of solder going on. And we're going to just put them together, just side by side, and do the same thing. Just get a little solder on there so it flows over both. There we go. So it flows both over both wires. So that should be a good connection right there on your solder. Easy as that, and that's how you do a butt solder. So I'll get you zoomed back out here. I'm going to pull over my piece of heat shrink that I had staged. Now you can use a lighter or something. I've got this little industrial hair dryer that I use to heat shrink. And there you've got a good connection butt solder. And to test that, something that everybody needs on the bench is a good or a cheap multimeter. And what I'm going to do is just set this to, I have it already set to measure resistance. And so if there's a short, the resistance is 0. So that's a good way to detect shorts in your build. And I'll do this definitely before I plug in the battery, because if you have a short in your build, things catch on fire very easily. So I'm just going to put one prong of my multimeter on that end and one on the other end. And hopefully, we're hoping for conductivity here, so we know that we did it correctly. It might not be. This is a cheapo multimeter. I might not be getting this side because it's a little difficult to get into that contact. All right. And good, yes. So you see here, it's reading 0. So we have good connection there. So we made a good connection. It's just a little trick on how I test for continuity using impedance on your multimeter. So we're going to put this away, keep my workbench tidy. So that should be all set up to go. We've got your power and ground here, and I believe that the Cricut, I'm going to need another zip tie there. I believe that the Cricut can accept pretty much any voltage on here. I'm going to pull up this wiring chart here so I can double check here. So let's see. So if we're looking at it, and then MCX up, where is it? There we go, like that. Got your wires, 5-volt output, that's nice to have, then ground, then video. So my orange wire is 5 volt. White wire is ground. That is not right. So I'll need to make sure this is, so you got to double check your wiring, guys. I know this is some pretty dry stuff, but this is how we do things. Smart audio, I'm not going to need that. I can take that out. And then ground and 7 to 28 volts. So yeah, that's definitely what we'll need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove that white wire. I don't know how or why that got in there. Take my tweezers. Are you building it without the OSD to the flight controller video direct from the cam to the VTX? Yes, James asks that question because this flight controller that I'm using is a Revolt version 2, and that is before they had OSD built in. So this is a non-OSD flight controller, doesn't have it built in. I usually prefer Betaflight OSD flight controllers. Those are really nice. I have flashed Betaflight onto this board since Raceflight is now kind of defunct. But I always like to have an OSD, and this camera provides a voltage output on it because I like to monitor my voltage on my battery at the very least. The other things are nice for Betaflight OSD is as far as tuning and stuff like that goes. But this is just the flight controller I had laying around, and it does not have an OSD. So good question. That is why this used to be broken, because it used to be on an OSD flight controller. Now it's not. So I'm going to remove this white wire here because I don't need it, and I like to keep a clean build, and I don't like to just cut them off because I can use them later. So I'm going to get in here with my tweezers and just pick up that little prong. See if we can get in here close for you guys so you can see what I'm doing. So you just pick up this little prong here with your tweezer, and then that pulls right out. And if you want to keep those nice, you kind of push that back down in there. So next time you go putting something in there, it'll stay. And then smart audio. I'm not going to be using smart audio in this build, which is this green wire. So we're going to take out smart audio. That up and just pull it out. All right. So that should be good. You've got 5 volts going to the camera, I believe. I'm going to double check that this isn't going to fry my camera. VCC. So 5 volts will be plenty for that. OSD resend. I'm going to need another harness for this camera, actually, now that I'm reading this. We'll worry about that later. But that should at least give me the connection from the VTX to the camera. And what I'm going to do here to get power I'm not sure if the Revolt has a power scrubber. To be able to run power if I want to run my VTX power through this board. Not sure if it has power filtering or not. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to play it safe and see. So VBAT and ground here is where I'm going to be tacking my VTX power to. And I'm going to do it underneath, again, because I like a nice clean build. So what I'm going to do is just have this, use my flight controller stack as kind of a nice holder there. And then I'm going to tin these two here, VBAT and ground. So I'll come back in here so you guys can see. Real nice and close and personal. This is a lot better than my GoPro last time. See if I can get some more light in here. There we go. So you've got your VBAT and your ground. So VBAT means you're getting full current. There's also a 5-volt BEC in case you needed to get 5 volts from somewhere. And then your ground. So we're going to just get a little bit of flux here on our tip of our solder so we can put it on those two terminals. And that's going to help the flux flow onto there once we apply heat. And just like our ESCs last time, if you guys weren't here last time, I said that you just need to make sure you get in there with the hot iron and get out. And I've got my iron set to about 730 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 390 degrees Celsius is what I usually set my iron to. A little bit higher if it's like a ground circuit that needs a lot more heat. But you're going to get in there with your soldering iron, touch the solder to it, and get out really quick. So, because if you apply too much heat for too long, that whole pad will just burn off of there. So we'll just get in there, once it gets nice and hot, touch your solder to it. Oh, come on, get on there, buddy. And it's just going to flow real nice onto that pad. So that was the ground. So that took a little bit more heat. And then we're going to do the same to VBAT, which is not going to take as much heat. Get in there, heat it up, touch your solder to the pad, and get that nice little blob of solder. The shinier the better when you're soldering. A good shiny connection means that you have a good connection most of the time. So we got that. Let's go ahead and I'm going to tin these wires here. See if I can get that in view while I'm tinning. Get my helping hands over here to hold those still. So I can tin them without having to chase them all over. All right. Again, I'm just going to kind of touch the flux on these guys, just get a little bit of flux on there. And actually, I've got a little bit of solder on my iron still, so I can kind of come in here and just tin them with that solder, and that's kind of stuck to my iron. And then clean my iron. All right, now let's get that off of there. Now I'm going to go ahead and solder up the power. Double, triple check that you do not mix up these wires. I don't know how many times I've done something dumb and you're just soldering along, you're going good, and for some reason, muscle memory or whatever, you solder the power wire to a ground or ground wire to a power, and you just mess up the whole thing. And that's not good, because that's what causes damage to components. So double check. Even if you thought you checked Check again. So there, that's a good connection. And then when I put the board on the way I intend, we can run that power cable underneath, so it kind of hides it when it's running under the board like that. That'll make it look real nice, and of course excuse the other wires that are just kind of flopping around here. That's going to make that build nice and clean. And I'm going to take that off again. And while we're at it, I'm just going to take this off. Twist these wires up so they stay nice and clean. I'm also going to twist these wires up, just kind of form a braid. And we've got a little extra on the yellow, which is going to bother me. Not going to lie, that's going to bother the heck out of me. But it'll work. It'll be okay. I'll just ignore it. And so we'll run that also underneath the flight controller, just in the interest of keeping it nice and clean. And that should be just long enough to come out to our camera. Ground. I'm pretty sure this camera has OSD anyway. VSYN and OSD. I'm gonna have to double check on that. But anyway, we're going with this. We're probably on track to be able to test the video system here. Hopefully, that would be cool. So I'm going to go ahead and get the camera all mounted up, which will require some hardware that I do not have right here. But I do have it over here. So I've got a big assortment of random bits and pieces that I kind of keep in a cabinet over here. I kind of mentioned last time that I keep all my wires and stuff in these little motor boxes. So these are Emax motor boxes, and these are just all the various bits of wire. I always save these little bits that I take off. I always save when I put them in a little box like this. So when the time comes, like these are old battery leads, which make awesome battery leads to, or mains leads to go into the quad. So I do that with hardware as well. So I'm going to pull out some hardware here that I've just kind of collected over my course of building. Let's see if I have some good camera hardware. So I think these are all the camera screws here. So let's get this out. Yeah, and that's going to be perfect. Get my hex driver out here as well. I think this is a 1.5. Oh, that's a 2. I want to thank everybody who's watching right now for coming and hanging out. You guys are being great. Good questions. Hope this is entertaining content. Hope it's not completely boring. I'm planning on doing an entire build, so from start to finish of this drone, complete with programming, the test fly, first flight video. I want to tell you all how to work in beta flight with this drone. So if you're interested in that kind of content, definitely, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe on YouTube. If you're watching on Facebook, go over and like the Academy of Model Aeronautics Facebook page, or join the iFly AMA Facebook group. because we post these on here, post those on there. Definitely give you guys a hint as to when we're coming up. So if you like this content, go ahead and do that. Make sure to give us a like too, because that lets us know if people want to watch this. I might get shut down. They might say, well, you know what? You didn't get enough likes, Dylan. We're not going to do this anymore. That would stink, because this is fun. I like doing this. So definitely go over there and check those out. In the meantime, if you're hurting for some more content, we've got other people on those channels that also do builds, do little tips. Kyle Jarris, our education director, has been doing quick projects. So if you've got, young ones, or you just like making paper airplanes, he's got little videos that he likes to post on there and go live. Mostly on the Facebook page on iFlyIMA. You can follow those videos as well. All right, so that looks like that's going to be it there. And the one thing about this frame is since it's kind of a low boy, it's got that little cutout so that the camera can actually do some good tilt, which is kind of neat. A lot of times with these kind of frames, you have to get a micro-sized or a very small camera to use on here. But this is a nice thought out design so that camera can just kind of low boy it right in there. I might need some smaller screws actually. Those are kind of long. Those aren't wanting to tighten up. Also, if you guys are interested in other facets of the hobby, our monthly magazine is now being offered for free as a PDF download at modelaviation.com. So usually you have to be a member to get that publication, but because we're all kind of in this COVID crap, they've decided, hey, let's go ahead and open that up to everybody so everybody can get into model aviation. Because really all this is for us is an extended build season. You can still get out and fly too. You just got to be 6 feet away, or 6 feet away from your spotter, wear a mask. Some of the parks aren't opened up yet, which is a bummer, like the campgrounds and stuff. State parks. State parks are open. But that's another way you can entertain yourself while you're waiting with bated breath for me to get back with part 3 next week. As far as I know, we're still going to be doing another one Tuesday at 2. Same bat time, same bat channel. Oh, that is a 1.5. And wherever I leave off here, it's not going to work. I'm going to pick up next week, which we're getting about 10 minutes out. And I don't want to spend more than an hour on these because that just that slows down, especially when you're sitting here trying to watch me find hardware that I should have figured out before the stream. It's a little old. So I think hour-long snippets are going to work for these. Is anybody else building anything? Anybody else got any projects going on? Anybody not fly multirotors got something else in the works? Just interested in seeing what multirotors are all about? What else are you guys building? Or is everybody just flying? Can't fly without building, For a little while you can. Nothing? Nobody building anything? All right. I think that's going to work. So go ahead and connect my camera up. Get that in place. Connect my flight controller back again since I unhooked that. I'm going to go ahead and solder on the main leads here too so we can test this video system out and see if I need to buy a new VTX, because I didn't listen to my own advice about double checking. Murphy's Law, right? So let me get out my red leads. Actually, I think I might have some. Well, no, they included a lead actually, which is very nice of them. So I don't even need to mess with that because they gave me one. I don't know. I was kind of thinking about making a short one though. Just have it sticking up about like that. That'll look good. Something like that. Oh, we got some people talking. What are we doing? Just finished a iFlight S. What is that? SL5 Sidora? That sounds like a jet, maybe? John? That's cool. Got my tiny trainer put together the other day. What is a tiny trainer? Waiting for better weather to fly. Yeah, it's raining here. It was actually a beautiful weekend in good old Muncie, Indiana, home of the AMA. So I'm right there with you. And I think I am going to cut this down. Here, let's make it the length of our capacitor so I can shrink wrap the capacitor in there. Have that all nice and put together, because that's going to be cool. Cut off those leads. That is some thick wire. Strip off just the end here. What are we at? 253. I might go a little bit over because I don't want to leave you hanging on whether or not my VTX worked. Tiny Trader is from Evan and Mondo at 533. It's the little 3-inch racer 4 looking dude. Oh, racer 4 looking? Oh, that sounds cool. I'm gonna have to check that out. I'll go ahead and get some flux on these leads here and tin up my leads. I've already tinned up the pads, but now I'm going to tin the leads. That just makes it a lot easier to get everything to stick. Put a little bit more flux on there. These are thick gauge wires. Get that melted in. Sometimes I cheat. I stick the solder on the iron. I know that's not what you're supposed to do, but sometimes you just need that little touch of heat to get them started. All right. What I'm going to do here, let's see, what's the best way to do that? So that's the negative side there. So I'm going to go ahead and solder these on. And check real closely here. This is the positive side and that's the negative side. Positive, negative, because this is the big one. If you mess this one up, not good. So I'm just going to solder it straight down, perpendicular, like that. Get a little bit of flux going. I know this is kind of a bad angle to see this solder, but I'll show you the joint after it's done. Got that one. Now it's time for the ground, which will probably take a lot more heat. All right, that looks like it's going to hold. Let's check out this connection. Yeah, that looks pretty bad. I'm going to add a little bit more solder and try to make that look a little nicer. There we go. Now it's flowing on there. As a rule of thumb, if I can see the strands of the wire, it's not a good solder. I like to have one just smooth kind of blob. There, that looks a lot better. Let's redo the positive side as well. Because you don't want this getting ripped off mid-flight either. A lot of times our batteries have the notion that they need to keep going when the drone stops. So let's see here. Little hacky. Not too bad. Oh, John is telling us about the, I don't know how to pronounce that, the Sakura 5-inch freestyle drone. Having trouble set up the receiver though, trying to make my old Futaba 7C work. Oh, yeah, Futaba, that's one protocol I don't know much about. I've flown FreeSky, I've flown Spectrum, I've flown FlySky, but I've not flown Futaba. I know actually our late President Emeritus, Bob Brown, was a big Futaba guy. Really sad to hear of his passing. He was a great guy. Did a lot for multirotors in the hobby. I'm still not quite happy with that. There we go. That's going to look a lot better. I'm going to come in here and just, there we go. Pretty particular. All right, now putting the capacitor on here. I'm not going to pretend to know what capacitors are for, guys. Sorry. I know they like help with the, you know, something about electrical spikes or something. It kind of puts a little filter on there so that doesn't happen. Somebody else probably knows a lot more about why you need to put a capacitor on your drone. They like filter the, I don't even know. I'm not even going to pretend to know. I just know it's a good idea to put capacitors on drones. But what I'm going to do is just kind of stick this guy on there and then bend him up. Make sure your negative goes to your negative. Capacitors do have polarity. I do know that about capacitors. And it's 3 o'clock. Like I said, guys, if you don't mind, I'm going to just stay on here until I get the video system up and running, just so we can have that knocked out in this episode. You can catch the rest of it later if you have somewhere to be at 3 o'clock. I didn't put any flux or anything on there, that's why. Or you can just come back next week and see what ended up happening. These capacitor leads soldered on here. Has anyone chimed in about capacitors yet? Nope. Make sure that stays away from the negative lead. All right, cool. I might have cut those leads a little too short to have them come up on the main lead like I wanted. See if I can get a little bit more slack out of them. Well, I'm going to figure out how to get that on a little bit better another time. I'm just going to solder it on there for now. Might even put another capacitor on there with some longer leads, because I think I cut those too short. Anyway, that's on there for now, so we can test our video system, because I know you guys are just waiting to see that. Before I plug a battery into this, though, I'm going to take my multimeter. I'm going to have it on the impedance test. We're going to see, hopefully we don't this time get continuity if we check our positive and our negative, and we don't. So that is a good sign. That means we do not have any shorts in the system. I'm going to go ahead and connect the VTX, see if that introduces any kind of shorts or anything like that. Just double check here. Good. So that is a good sign. Another way to check that is having a little device called a smoke stopper. So that's taken by wiring up a automotive headlight bulb kind of in between the battery and the drone. And basically, if something were to happen, this is going to light up and hopefully pop before the current makes it, kind of limits the current, so all the current doesn't make it to the drone and burn something up. So let's go ahead and get this antenna on here, and hopefully if I start this up, we'll see some FPV video. Turn on the FPV feed here. All right, good battery. Wish me luck, guys. Moment of truth. Let's see if this happens. Worst case scenario, we get some smoke and you all can laugh at me. Hey, that's a good idea. Okay, let's turn on our VTX. Let's cycle through these channels here, see if we pick something up. No smoke, right? That's a good sign. Hey, look at that. Check that out. That's not coming through. Why not just use a fuse? You can do that. Some smoke stoppers do that. But this lets you know real quick. Because if you plug it in and the light bulb lights up, it's a lot better visual cue that you can get, because it doesn't stop it all the time. Sometimes you plug it in, the light bulb goes up, and you still get smoke. So the light bulb kind of tells you, hey, unplug now. So that's a really quick visual cue. So I'm going to plug it directly in here. I'm not getting that second set of beeps, which means I'm not sure. The FC and the ESC aren't talking. So that'll be something to troubleshoot. But for right now, we do have FPV signal, which is what we wanted. So, hey guys, I really appreciate you hanging out. And if you have any last questions as I wrap this up, definitely get them in now. But I just wanted to again say thank you for coming and watching my stream, watching me build. Next time, hopefully we can make the next steps. We're definitely going to troubleshoot why the motors aren't talking. That might be a little bit too premature though. But yeah, hopefully we can get a receiver wired up to this guy next time. So again, thanks a lot for stopping by. I really appreciate everybody here. Definitely subscribe to us on YouTube if you want to see more videos like this. And if you want to get notified of the next video that I'm going to do, go over like Model Aviation on YouTube, on Facebook, and join iFly AMA so you can see what everybody else is working on in the hobby. So for now, appreciate you guys. See you next time.